The head has been up there long enough that no one looks anymore. It sits on a spike above the stone gatehouse at the southern end of London Bridge, tar-blackened, tilted at an angle that might almost be mistaken for contemplation, while below it a city of 50,000 souls goes about its mourning. Fishwives call their prices.
Fresh fish! Best catch in the river!
A merchant's barge cuts upstream against the current. Somewhere in the tangle of alleys behind Cheapside, a pig has escaped its pen and is being chased by 3 small boys and a furious butcher. The head watches none of it. It simply endures, as London itself has always endured, by refusing to look away from its own darkness. There is a version of Tudor London that most people carry around in their heads, assembled from period dramas and romantic paintings, a city of velvet doublets, candle-lit feasts, and the distant silhouette of towers against a golden sky. That version is not wrong, exactly. It is just radically incomplete. The London of Henry VIII in 1530 was one of the most extraordinary cities in the Western world, and also one of the most brutally, overwhelmingly alive. It smelled terrible. It was gorgeous.
The quality is unmatched.
It was violent and brilliant and teeming and terrifying all at once, and there was nothing else quite like it anywhere on earth. This is that city, its streets, its bridge, its palaces, its secrets, before the fires and the plagues and the centuries of Reconstruction buried most of it forever. To understand Tudor London, you need to first understand its position in the world. In 1530, the city held roughly 50,000 people, enormous by the standards of the age, and more than 13 times the size of Norwich, the next largest city in England. It was the undisputed commercial capital of the kingdom, processing more wool broadcloth through its docks than Bristol, Southampton, Hull, and Exeter combined. Ships from Antwerp, Venice, and Hamburg jostled for berths along the Thames. Spices from the Levant, fine linen from Flanders, glass from Venice, and wine from Bordeaux all flowed through its customs houses. The city was, in the language of its own age, the jewel of the realm, and like most jewels, it was only beautiful from certain distances. Stand on the north bank of the Thames in 1530, and the first thing you notice is not the grandeur. It is the noise. The river itself is a constant roar of commerce. Oars, sails, shouting watermen, the creak of ropes, and the thud of cargo on wooden quays. The city behind it is a dense, three-dimensional tangle of timber-framed houses with upper stories that jut progressively further over the street with each floor, so that on the narrowest lanes the eaves of opposite buildings nearly touch. Sunlight reaches the ground for perhaps 2 hours on a clear afternoon. The rest of the time, these streets exist in a kind of perpetual amber dusk, smoky, loud, and thick with the smell of tallow, fish, animal dung, and the open sewers that run down the center of every road toward the river. But then there is London Bridge, and London Bridge is something else entirely. By 1530, the bridge had been standing for more than 3 centuries. It was completed in 1209, dedicated to Thomas Becket, and had been accreting buildings along its length almost from the moment the mortar dried. What stood there in Henry's time was not a bridge in any modern sense of the word. It was a street, a crowded, vertical, improbably narrow street built on 19 stone piers in the middle of a tidal river, stretching nearly 900 feet from one bank to the other. Along both sides of its 12-foot wide roadway stood roughly 200 houses and shops, some rising to 6 stories, leaning toward each other overhead so that the passage below felt more like a tunnel than a crossing. Merchants sold cloth, spices, and luxury goods in the lower floors. Their families lived above. Children were born on London Bridge, grew up on London Bridge, and sometimes, in one notorious case, fell off London Bridge into the Thames. A girl named Anne Hewitt, who was rescued, and later, in a story that could only belong to this era, reportedly married the man who pulled her from the river. Here is the detail that tends to produce a long silence in any room. The bridge's 19 stone piers sat on enormous wooden platforms called starlings, which were so wide that they blocked nearly 2/3 of the river's flow. The water piling up against them created a difference in water level of up to 5 or 6 feet between the upstream and downstream sides. Passing through the arches, shooting the bridge, as Londoners called it, was genuinely hazardous. The current funneled between the piers at tremendous speed, and boats capsized regularly. Cardinal Wolsey, one of the most powerful men in England, absolutely refused to do it. On his many journeys between Hampton Court and Greenwich, he would have his barge stop upstream at Three Cranes Wharf, travel overland by mule to Billingsgate, and re-embark on the other side. The most powerful churchman in the kingdom would rather ride a mule through the mud of Thames Street than risk the bridge he could see from the river. At the southern end of that bridge, above the gatehouse known as Bridge Gate, the heads of traitors and criminals were displayed on iron spikes, boiled in salt to preserve them from rapid decay, then coated in tar. There could be as many as 30 at once during particularly turbulent periods. Visitors from the continent noted them with a mixture of fascination and unease. To Londoners, they were simply part of the skyline, a reminder, as the city's authorities intended, of the cost of disloyalty. In 1530, the heads up there belonged mostly to men who had crossed a king who was, at that particular moment in history, in the process of remaking the entire religious and political architecture of England. Because 1530 is not an ordinary year. It sits at the precise hinge point of a transformation so total that the London of 1540 would look almost unrecognizable compared to the London of 1520. Henry VIII had by this point been king for 21 years. He had begun as the Golden Prince of European humanism, educated, athletic, genuinely brilliant, the kind of monarch that poets wrote odes to before he had done anything at all. By 1530, the gold had developed a harder edge. His marriage to Catherine of Aragon had produced no surviving male heir. His obsession with Anne Boleyn had become the most dangerous political and theological crisis in England since the Norman Conquest. Cardinal Wolsey, his chief minister for 15 years, the man who had built York Place into one of the grandest palaces in England, the man who refused to shoot the bridge, had just fallen from power, accused of failing to secure the papal annulment Henry needed. He would be dead within the year. What came next reshaped the physical city in ways that are still visible today. Between 1530 and 1540, Henry seized York Place from Wolsey and transformed it into Whitehall Palace, the largest palace in Europe, sprawling across 23 acres between the Thames and St. James's Park. a vast complex of galleries, courts, a jousting yard, a cockpit, a bowling alley, and private chambers that reflected the full, theatrical weight of royal power. He also seized Hampton Court, which Wolsey had originally built to be the most spectacular non-royal residence in England. Hampton Court was, in its way, a statement that no subject, however gifted, should live more grandly than the king. But the truly seismic change was ecclesiastical. By 1530, the church owned roughly 1/3 of all land within the city walls of London. Monasteries, friaries, nunneries, and their associated hospitals and schools were woven into the fabric of the city as thoroughly as the streets themselves. St. Mary's Spital, north of Bishopsgate, the Charterhouse in Clerkenwell, the Greyfriars on Newgate Street, the Blackfriars, whose name still marks the corner of London where a bridge now stands. When Henry began the dissolution of the monasteries later in the decade, these institutions didn't just close. They vanished physically, their buildings stripped and repurposed or demolished for materials, their centuries-old routines simply stopped. The hospitals they had run closed with them. The city scrambled to replace them, organizing formal poor relief in 1547, reconstituting the royal hospitals. But the shock to London's social infrastructure was profound, and the names of what had been lost were absorbed into the street map like epitaphs. Whitefriars, Blackfriars. The road to Canterbury, still walking past a bridge named for a saint whose head Henry's own ancestor had helped arrange to have removed. Through all of this, the politics, the theological rupture, the heads on the bridge, the palaces rising and falling, the ordinary city kept going. Cheapside hummed with market traders every morning, its 2 public conduits delivering fresh water to anyone who came with a bucket. The exchange set prices for wool and cloth, 200 merchants gathering daily in a room that smelled of money and ambition. The docks never stopped. The alehouses never closed. The narrow streets filled with people who had no particular interest in the king's marriage or the Pope's authority. People who needed to eat, to work, to argue with their neighbors over property lines that had been disputed since their grandparents' time. What we have lost of this city is almost everything. The Great Fire of 1666 took the medieval street pattern. The Blitz took what the fire and Victorian development had spared. Old London Bridge itself came down in 1831, its buildings long since removed, its stone piers finally yielding to engineering logic and the city's need to move faster than a Tudor merchant's mule could manage. What remains are fragments, the name Blackfriars above a station entrance, a single surviving gatehouse at the tower, the floor plan of Whitehall readable in the width of the road that replaced it. And the Thames, which has witnessed everything, which still runs tidal through the centre of a city built on the memory of what it once was. The heads are long gone from London Bridge. But the city they watched over, loud, brilliant, cruel and extraordinary, left its bones in the ground beneath your feet, waiting for someone to look down long enough to find them. History Recreated exists because the past deserves better than a costume drama. It deserves the full, unvarnished, mind-bending truth of how extraordinary it actually was. If you want more of this, subscribe to History Recreated right now, turn on notifications and drop us a comment. If you could walk one street in Tudor London for a single afternoon, which one would you choose? We want to know. And we will see you in the next chapter.